and I will be reading just like the title suggests. It is actually a novel called The Keys to the Kingdom, Mr. Monday, written by Garth Nix. It just like the 7 days of the week, it has 7 books. Unluckily, I do not have all of them, and I don't have the ones I do have with me. But for now, I will be reading from book one, Mr. Monday. So please follow along, and if you like how it's going, please like and subscribe for more because I won't be able to read all of it because it is long. It's hundreds of pages. So please follow with me. And it's a little wear and tear because of how old it is. So please be patient with me. And we have some bookmarks. Let's start with the prologue. They had tried to destroy the realm, but that proved to be beyond their power. So they broke it in 2 ways. It was broken physically, torn apart with the fragments of heavy parchment scattered across both space and time. It was broken in spirit, because not one clause of it had been fulfilled. If the treacherous trustees had their way, no clause of the will would ever be executed. To make sure of this, all 7 fragments of the will had been hidden with great care. The first and least of the fragments was fused inside a single clear crystal harder than diamond. Then the crystal was encased in a box with an box of unbreakable glass. The box was locked inside a cage of silver and malachite, and the cage was fixed in place on the surface of a dead sun at the very end of time. Around the cage, 12 metal sentinels stood guard, each taking post upon one of the numbers of a clock face that had been carved with permanent light in the dark matter of the defunct star. Bringing dark matter theory to the mix here. The sentinels, well, as everybody knows, in olden days, there were soldiers called sentinels, which holds high power and esteem. So these sentinels had been specifically created as guardians of the fragment. They were vaguely human in appearance, though twice as tall, and the skin were luminous. That means it was shining. The skins were luminous steel, quick and flexible as cacts. They had no hands, but single blades sprang from each wrist. Each sentinel was responsible for the space between its own hour and the next. The leader ruled from the position between 12 and 1. The metal sentinels were overseen by a careful chosen corps of inspectors, lesser beings who would not dare question the breakers of the will. Once every 100 years, one of these inspectors would appear to make sure that all was well and the fragment was safely locked away. In recent eons, the inspectors had become lax, rarely doing more than appear, squint at the cage box and crystal, salute the sentinels, and despair again. The sentinels, who had spent 10,000 years in faithful service marching between the chapters of the clock, did not approve of this slip-foot attention to duty. But it was not in their nature to complain, nor was there any means to do so. They would raise the alarm if necessary, but no more than that. The sentinels had seen many inspectors come and go. No one else had ever visited. No one had ever tried to steal or rescue the fragments of the well. In short, nothing had happened for all that 10,000 years. Then one day, all of a sudden, then on a day that was no different from any of these, the more than 3.5 million years that had gone before, an inspector arrived who took his duties more seriously. He arrived normally enough, simply appearing outside the clock face, his hat askew from the transfer, his official warrant clutched firmly in one hand so the bright gold seal was clearly visible. The sentinels twitched at the arrival, and their blades shivered in anticipation. The warrant and the seal were only half the permission required to be there. There was always a chance the watch words delivered by the previous inspector would not be uttered, and the sentinel blades would at last see blurring, slicing action. Of course, the sentinels were required to allow the inspector a minute's grace. It was not unknown for a transfer between time and space to briefly addle the wits of anyone, immortal or otherwise. The inspector did seem a bit the worse for wear. He wore a fairly standard human shape, that of a middle-aged man of rapidly thickening girth. This human body was clad in a blue frock coat, shining at the elbows and ink stained on the right calf. His white shirt was not really very white, and the badly tied green necktie did not adequately disguise the fact that his collar had come undone. Adrift. I mean, his top hat had seen much service and was both squashed and leaning to the left. When he raised it to acknowledge the sentinels, a sandwich wrapped in newspaper fell out. He caught it and slipped it into an inside pocket of his coat before speaking the watchwords. Incense, sulfur, and rue. I am an inspector, honest and true. He recited carefully, holding up the warrant again to show the seal. The 12 o'clock sentinel swiveled in place in answer to the watchwords and the seal. It crossed its blades with a knife-sharpening noise that made the inspector tremble and waved a salute in the air. "Approach, Inspector," intoned the sentinel. That was half of everything it ever said. The inspector nodded cautiously, stepped from the transfer plate to the curdled darkness of the dead star. He had taken the precaution of wearing immaterial boots, disguised as carpet slippers, to counteract the wrapping nature of the dead star's dark matter, though his superior had assured him that the warrant and the seal would be sufficient protection, he paused to pick up the transfer plate because it was a personal favorite. A large serving plate of delicate bone china with a fruit pattern, rather than the more usual disc of burnished electronium. It was a risk using a china plate because it could be easily broken, but it looked nice and that was important to the inspector. Even the inspectors were not allowed to pass the inner rim of the clock face, where the feet of the numerals were bordered by a golden line. So this inspector gingerly trod past the 12 o'clock sentinel and stopped short of the line. The silver cage looked as solid as it should, and the glass box was quite intact and beautifully transparent. He could easily see the crystal inside, just as it's supposed to be. All seems to be in order, he muttered. Relieved, he took a small box out of his coat pocket, flicked it open, and with a practiced movement transferred a small pinch of snuff to his right nostril. It was a new snuff, a present from a higher authority. All in order, he repeated, then let out an enormous sneeze that rocked his whole body and, for a moment, threatened to overbalance him over the goal line. The sentinels leaped, twisted from their regular positions, and the 12 o'clock sentinels' blades came whisking down within an inch of the inspector's face as he desperately windmilled his arms to regain his balance. Finally, he managed and tittered back on the right side of the line. Awfully sorry, terrible habit, he squeaked as he thrusted his snuff box securely away. I am an inspector, remember? He is around. Look at the seal. The sentinels subsided into their usual pacing. The 12 o'clock sentinel's arms went back to its sides, the blade no longer threatening. The inspector took out a huge patched handkerchief from his sleeve and mopped his face, but as he wiped his sweat away, he thought he saw something move across the surface of the clock. Something small and thin and dark. When he blinked and removed his handkerchief, he couldn't see anything. I don't suppose there's anything to report, he asked nervously. He hadn't been an inspector long, a decade short of 4 centuries, and he was only an inspector of the fourth order. He'd been a third bank hall porter for most of his career, almost since the beginning of time. Before that, nothing to report, said the 12 o'clock sentinel, using the rest of his standard vocabulary. The inspector politely tipped his hat to the sentinel, but he was not concerned. But he was concerned. He could feel something here, something not quite right. But the penalty for a false alarm was too horrible to contemplate. He might be demoted to being a hall porter, or even worse, be made corporal, stripped of his powers and memory, and sent somewhere in the secondary realms as a living, breathing baby. Of course, the penalty of missing something important was even worse. He might be made corporal for that, but it would not be as anything even vaguely human, or on a world where there was intelligent life, and even that was not the worst that could happen. There were far more terrible fates, but he refused to contemplate them. The inspector looked across at the cage, the glass box, and the crystal. He got a pair of opera glasses out of an inner pocket and looked through those. He could still see nothing out of order. Surely, he told himself, the sentinels would know if something had gone amiss. He stepped back outside the clock and all in order, you sentinels, he said. The watchwords for the next inspector will be thistle, palm, oak, and yew. I am an inspector, honest and true. Got it? Excellent. Well, I'll be off. The 12 o'clock sentinel saluted. The inspector lifted his hat once more, swiveled on one heel, and set down his transfer plate, chanting the words that would take him to the house. According to the regulations, he was supposed to go via the Office of Unusual Activities on the 15th floor and report. But he was unsettled and wanted to get back to the 10th floor for his own comfortable study and a nice cup of tea. From that star's gloom to bright lamp's light, back to my room and away from night. Before he could step on the place, something small and very black shot across the golden line between the legs of the 12 o'clock sentinel, across the inspector's left imperial boot, and onto the plate. The blue and green glistened. Alarm! Alarm! Cried the sentinels, leaving the clock face to swarm around the vanished plate. They snickering in all directions, and the sound of 12 impossible loud alarms clouds rang and rang from somewhere inside their metal bodies. The inspector shrank down before the sentinels and started to chew corner of his handkerchief and sob. He knew that the black streak was. He had recognized it in a flash of terror as it sped past. It was a line of handwriting text. The text from the fragment that was supposedly still fused in the crystal, locked in an unbreakable box, inside the silver and malachite cage, glued to the surface of a dead sun and guarded by metal sentinels. Only now none of those were true. One of the fragments of the will had escaped, and it was all his fault. Even worse, it had touched him, striking his flesh straight through the material boot. So he knew what it said, and he was not allowed to know. Even more shockingly, the will had recalled him to his real duty. For the first time in a millennia, he was conscious of just how badly things had gone wrong. Into the trust of my good Monday, I placed the administration of the lower house, the inspector whispered, until the time as the heir or the heir's representatives call upon Monday to relinquish any such office, properties, rights, and opportunities as Monday holds in trust. The sentinels did not understand him, or perhaps they could not hear him over the clamoring of their own internal alarms. They had spread out, uselessly searching the surface of the Death Star, beams of intense light streaming from their eyes into the darkness. The star was not large, no more than 1,000 years in diameter, but the fragment was long gone. The inspector knew it would already have left his rooms and gotten into the house proper. I have to get back, the inspector said. The will need help. Transfer plate's gone, so it'll have to be the long way. He reached out his coat and pulled out a grimy, bedraggled pair of wings. They were almost as tall as he was. The inspector hadn't used them for a very long time and was surprised at the state they were in. The feathers were all yellow and askew, and the pinners did not look at all reliable. He clipped them into place on his back and took a few tentative flaps to make sure they still worked. Distracted by his wings, the inspector did not notice a sudden flash of light upon the surface of the clock, or the two figures who appeared with that flash. They wore human shapes too, as was the fashion in the house, but these two were taller, thinner, and more handsome. They had on neat black frock coats over crisp white shirts with high pointed collars and a very neat neckties of somber red, a shade lighter than their dark silk waistcoats. Their top hats were sleekly black and they carried ornate ebony sticks toppled with silver knobs. "Where are you think you're going, Inspector?" asked the taller of the two new rebels. The inspector turned and shocked as his wings dropped still further. "To report, sir," he said weakly. "As you can see, to my immediate superiors, and to Monday is Dawn, or even Mr. Monday, if he wants." "Mr. Monday will know soon enough," said the tall gentleman. "You know who we are?" The inspector shook his head. They were very high up in the firm. That was obvious from their clothes and the power he could sense, but he did not know them either by name or by rank. "Are you the 600th floor, Mr. Monday's executive office?" The taller gentleman smiled and drew a paper from his waistcoat pocket. It unfolded itself and held it up, and the seal upon it shone so brightly that the inspector had to shield his face with his arm and duck his head. "As you can see, we serve a higher master than Monday," said the gentleman. "You will come with us." The inspector gulped and shambled forward. One of the gentlemen swiftly pulled on a pair of snowy white gloves and snapped the inspector's wings. They shrank till they were longer no larger than a dove's wings, and he put them in a buff envelope that came from nowhere. He sealed his shut with a sizzling press with his thumb. Then he handed the envelope to the inspector. The word "evidence" appeared on the inspector as the inspector clutched it to his chest and cast nervous glances at his escorts. Working together, the two gentlemen drew a doorway in the air with their sticks. When they finished, the space shimmering for a moment and then solidified into a elevator doorway with a siding metal grill and a bronze call button. One of the gentlemen pressed the button and an elevator suddenly appeared out of nowhere behind the grill. "I'm not authorized to go in an executive elevator, not up past records by any means, stair or lift or wet way," gabbled the inspector, "and I'm definitely not authorized to go down below the inking cellars." The two gentlemen pushed back the grill and adjusted for the inspector to step into the elevator. It was lined with dark green velvet, with one entire wall was covered in a small bronze buttons. "We're not going down, are we?" asked the inspector in a small voice. The taller gentleman smiled, and a cold smile that did not reach his eyes. He reached up his arm clicked horribly as it was growing an extra couple yards so he could press on the very top right hand side of the lift. There, asked the inspector, awed in spite of his fear. He could feel the will's influence working away inside of him, but he knew there was no hope of trying to help it now. The words had gotten away would have to fend for themselves, all the way to the top. Yes, said the two gentlemen in unison as they clanged shut the metal grill. Chapter 1. It was Arthur Penhaligon's Halligan's first day at his new school, and it was not going well, having to start 2 weeks after everyone else was batting up. Oh, I understand. That happened to me once. But it was even worse than that. Arthur had totally and utterly new to the school. His family had just moved to town, so he knew absolutely no one, and he had none of his local knowledge that would make life easier. Well, I'm taking a break for now, and on my next live video of this, I will continue on. Like and subscribe for more, and please then check out our videos, especially my Mobile Legends Bang Bang videos I will be uploading from time to time, and I'll keep you updated on what I'm doing. Bye.